Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of this international conference on live interfaces. This morning with the first talk, Performative Arena, Historical and Philosophical Views. And for this morning we have Boris Debackere, I hope that I'm spelling the name well, from Netherlands, and a round table with two gurus from Lusófona, Luís Cláudio Ribeiro and José Gomes Pinto. We start with Boris. I think he's already online. And Boris will talk about mediated environments and something. He told that will be something meditative, so we are very curious about that. Boris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. So
Great.
when you want, you can start.
I will share my screen. Let me see if that's working. Exactly. Oh, now you saw the end of the video. 1 second. There we go. I think there is a problem with the sharing once. Let me hold on. Are you also hearing the sound? Okay, perfect. And I think we're good to go. Psyched, to extend our reality, it becomes imperative to reconsider how media and environments relate. Media are not merely a conduit for information. They are spaces where information is distributed and experienced. Under the header Mediated Environments, I would like to propose an exploration of alternative spatial metaphors once we deem to extend reality. On October 4, 1957, the first artificial satellite was brought into orbit. 1 year after the launch of Sputnik 1, Hannah Arendt's seminal book, The Human Condition, opens with the surprising observation that in the press, the immediate reaction expressed on the spur of the moment was relief about the first step towards escape from man's imprisonment to the earth. The similarities are striking when virtual reality in the 1990s sparked dreams of breaking out of our physical environment. We were fascinated by the new virtual spaces made possible by computer technologies, images of an escape into virtual space that leaves physical space useless, and of cyberspace, a virtual world that exists in a parallel to our world, dominated the decade. The exchange of the physical space for cyberspace repositioned the body into the bargain, erasing the demarcation between body and machine, aspire towards disembodied experiences on the other side of the computer screen. Although the idea of virtuality has a rich history in the arts, literature, and philosophy, the technological induced blurring between the actual reality and the computational media is giving rise to new mythologies. Within our technoculture, there is a proliferation of stories about virtual escape and virtual freedom, encouraging an alarming disengagement with the world of historical contingency, which happens to be the world we live in. Today, the burgeoning field of extended reality is unequivocally challenging, again, how we conceive, experience, and interact with an environment as we pivot between physical and digital presence. Driving the fourth industrial revolution, extended reality technologies are creating location-aware applications to interact with smart objects and smart processes. Among the multi-pronged digital strategies of the fourth industrial revolution, the prevailing tendency is a frictionless conversion of technology that shrinks the boundaries between the physical and the digital world. This ostensible paradigm shift that promises us a new digital economy should fundamentally change how we humans, machines, and objects interact by seamlessly mixing real and virtual realities. While at present, radical new XR technologies are notably absent, the conception of extended reality is definitely recalibrating how we mediate an environment beyond our familiar devices. Nevertheless, every digital interaction is bound to a technical setup in a physical place, and therefore the outside never disappears on the virtual continuum. The environment is a prerequisite, as Arendt reminds us. The earth is the very quintessence of the human condition, and earthly nature, for all we know, may be unique in the universe in providing human beings with a habitat in which they can move and breathe without effort and without artifice. The human artifice of the world separates human existence from all mere animal environments, but life itself is outside this artificial world. And through life, man remains related to all other living organisms. Traditionally, in a VR context, a mediated environment functions as a spatial metaphor, creating a virtual space alongside the virtual body or avatar, and facilitating the experience of a mediated embodiment. However, for Jonathan Steuer, a mediated environment features a form of communication technology in which information is not transmitted from sender to receiver. Rather, mediated environments are created and then experienced. Originally, Steuer's description referred to the telepresent context where users who are both sender and receiver should interact with a shared space to establish communication. As such, media are not merely a conduit for communication, they are spaces where information is distributed and experienced. Steuer's definition of a mediated environment strongly resembles also Edward Schenken's juxtaposition with VR, with what he defines as a charged environment, a responsive environment and context, such as an intelligent architecture and interactive installation, tend not to create a representation that corresponds with the physical reality, but rather utilizes a real space in a way that renders it virtual and enables alternative, expanded forms of experience and awareness. A prime example of such a charged environment remains the Philips Pavilion designed by Le Corbusier, also in 1958, for the World Fair in Brussels. The Poème électronique was conceived as a synergy of architecture with Yanis Xenakis, sound by Edgar Varese, and film by Philippe Agostini, with the pavilion as a vessel for this multimedia production avant la lettre. Le Corbusier was entirely focused on the interior, showing little or no interest in the exterior of the building. In correspondence with his collaborators, he stated, "I will not make a facade for Philips, but an electronic poem. Everything will happen inside: sound, light, color, rhythm. Perhaps a scaffolding will be the pavilion's only exterior aspect. So instead of a facade for displaying technology, this automated space wrapped the audience in a concrete shell filled with electronic images and sound. The Poème électronique, a synthetic work of art as an encapsulating environment, could be seen as a precursor to virtual reality." The same year, in contemporary art, Alan Capro described his room-sized multimedia works as environments. In doing so, he fundamentally changed the dynamics between the artworks, the gallery, and the audience. It shifted the focus from presenting objects in a space to capturing the entire space, physically surrounding the visitor who could experience the work while being a part of it. These environments were conceived with specific forms of participation in mind that involved the spectator. Capro introduced an interactive model between the work and the viewer and afforded an active experience where something could be contributed by the spectator within the structure established by the artist. Ultimately, in line with Capro's philosophy of integrating art and life, the idea of audience had to be eliminated altogether, leaving only participants. In his conception of the term, all environments could also be described as installations, but the reverse is not true. The term environment preceded the term installation art, according to Reis. Like Hannah Arendt, also Marcia McLuhan wondered about the launch of the Sputnik. The date when a man-made environment went around the planet, he chimed. If he defined technology as extensions of man, of our bodies, of our faculties, he questioned whether Sputnik then possibly was an extension of the world itself. The satellite orbiting the planet transformed what we called nature into an art form, an ecological programmable environment. For McLuhan, up until then, the primary function of our extensions or artifacts was to use art as control, to control our environment. But Sputnik introduces new aspects. for using the total environment as a work of art, as an artifact. As you might all know, the satellite transmitted beeps on the amateur radio band. It was relatively straightforward, actually, to locate the object by the variations in frequency caused by the Doppler effect. And by analyzing the data from that fixed location on Earth, one could deduce an entire trajectory of its orbit and predict the exact position at any given time. In that sense, Sputnik became the forerunner of modern global positioning systems, when the question of the position was reversed. How to determine an unknown location on Earth where the signal is received from a satellite whose trajectory is known precisely. And it is exactly that reversal technique that sparked the invention of GPS. It's what Peters proposes to change our perspective on the relation between media and environments in his book, The Marvelous Clouds. For Peters, the old idea that media are environments can be flipped. The environments are also media. The proliferation of digital devices conveying the ephemeral flows of information is reconfiguring our experience of space. Digital devices invite us to think of media as environmental, as part of the habitat, and not just as a semiotic inputs and outputs into people's heads. Equipped with advanced devices nowadays, we dwell as modern flaneurs on the momentary interactions with location-based services, commonly referred to as locative media. These positioning technologies assume communication through, with, and in an environment. Apart from reaching the environment, these multi-dimensional interactions models also affect our body in relation to the environment. Ultimately, all reality is a mixed form through interfacing bodies with their surroundings and technologies. On an individual level, wearable and implantable technologies are providing the supercomputer in our pocket, and ubiquitous or pervasive computer compels the physical machine to disappear into the environment and computation to reappear everywhere and anytime. Our probing interactions with the physical world remolds and restructure it into a smart and predictive environment. As described by Anderson and Paul, surroundings are increasingly turned into data that can be used to determine and anticipate events. As a consequence, this datification changes our perception of the world, but also the world itself, to the extent that knowledge is seemingly not produced about the world anymore, but instead from the world. This results in a large statistical body whose reality depends on the mining and processing of data that turns the whole world into an interface, as they call the meta-interface. At first sight, the alternation between accumulating data and automating processes appears to be the primary interface between humans and digital technologies. However, according to Alexander Galloway, interfaces are not simply objects or boundary points. They are autonomous zones of activity. Interfaces are not things, but rather processes that erect the result of whatever kind. Galloway is not referring to interface objects, but interface effects. Digital media are performative and transforming systems. Mapping an environment suggests a continuous updating cartography that describes the information flows and processes, but never a fixed point in space. As such, the performance of information exchange is entirely entangled with the environment. And while I'm using your gaze to listen to my voice, and I'm watching at my clock, which is counting down from 20 minutes. I see I still have 3 minutes left. So I will use these 2.5 minutes to tell you still something about the spectacle of immersion, the state of absorption facilitated by technology that is frequently used as a qualitative benchmark. Immersivity and presence have been associated with or regarded as an indicator of successful VR applications due to the technological constraints that made immersivity a unique quality of VR. However, a medium eventually just functions as a trigger for mental processes that generate an illusion. Therefore, immersion is predominantly a quality of imagination and not a property of technology. As McAllister was also pointing out, it is not enough to explain immersion as a characteristic of a certain media type, because immersion is not a component of any medium. Rather, I'm thinking that immersion is purely an invention of the mind of the own immersed one. And for this reason, there is no negotiation between immersion, because immersion is a figment of the imagination. So if we come back to the idea of total environment as a work of art, as McLuhan was pointing out, and we see nowadays that the navigation and search engines from big tech companies turn our behavioral data into rich, predictive data serving surveillance capitalism. My question would be how we're going to negotiate or renegotiate these spaces and places that we inhabit. Thank you very much. Let me put on my camera.
Thank you very much, Boris. I forget to present the conferencists, but I must say that Boris is an artist and researcher lecturing at Lucas School of Arts in Catholic University of Lisbon. Boris, thank you very much for your original presentation and actually meditative presentation. I hope the discussion to the audience, any contribution, any question? Okay, Adriana.
Yeah. Thank you. Oops, sorry. Hi, Boris. This was
Hello.
really beautiful alternative to PowerPoint. I would like to understand a little bit better. I would ask you to elaborate a little bit more about this difference that you pointed out between knowledge about the world and knowledge from the world. So I'm not sure I understood well, so I would just like you to explain a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, the whole exercise, what I'm trying to do here under that header mediated environments, is basically to flip around, or to basically exchange kind of notions of how we deal with our environments, how we deal with extensions. And of course, what I'm trying to do here is to give you a bunch of historical references that is addressing similar topics in, for instance, when we think about if we think about the extension of man, what's going to happen when all of a sudden an environment starts extending towards us. And of course, this is not, there is no there's not really a dichotomy, and has never been, but still in the conception of how we deal with our mediated worlds and lives, quite often these mythical ideas prevail still up till today. And so the knowledge from and about the world, it's more about how you, in the one hand, use your media as a representation from the world, or how you use your media in cooperation with the world as a generative or a performative system, basically.
Boris, I would like you something about the notion of virtuality, because Catherine Hales said in the famous book How We Became Posthuman, virtuality is not an alternative reality. Virtuality is the fact that all objects, artificial or not, could be interpenetrated by information. And this maybe has some relation with your notion of augmented reality, because in this quote, and I think that Alexander Galloway, but also John Peters' quote, Catherine Hales, about this virtuality, because we are not here. We are not talking about the computer as an interface to other worlds, but we are talking about the agency, the energy, the potency of anything, a man-made object or not. And we all know that with metaverse and all these kind of things, it seems that we have some rehabilitation of the virtual reality of the 90s, but at the same time we have the object-oriented ontologies and so on that seems that see the virtuality in everything. Do you want to make a comment about this?
I deliberately didn't have Catherine Hales in here, but of course there are lots of links and ties to be, absolutely. And I think she was, of course, already right. I believe her famous book, How We Became Posthuman, is from, what, 1999 or something like that? Yes. Which was kind of like saying, actually, her title is kind of deceptive in a way. I was thinking this morning, I opened the newspaper and I saw Mark Zuckerberg showing or demoing a new headset, and it's all about being away from the world, etc., etc. So, and this is what's on a daily basis in the popular news channels. And at the same time, indeed, what I see amongst my students, there is a, it's very seductive let's say, to go along into that narrative. And all the references that you also just mentioned, that I mentioned, and there are of course still a lot more, they're kind of getting a bit in a bleak way, where they're almost disappearing with all the shouting of the tech companies and the fourth industrial revolution, as we see every year discussed in places like Davos and whatnot. So I think that, and that's also why this is not a final conclusion or statement, but it is, as I said in the beginning of the talk, it is a proposal to keep continuously exploring alternative spatial metaphors and how we deal and think about this act of extending our reality. And I'm using extending reality because, of course, this is like the umbrella catch-all term between virtual, augmented, and mixed reality. And the fact of the mediated environment, which of course we know also from the theory from virtual reality, I think that how Le Corbusier was talking about that is pretty close to what I'm kind of after at. Like, he was almost like not interested in his building, but was interested in just the media as such, which is of course impossible in terms of thinking as only virtual, because there is no, I mean, there is always a materiality to it, of course. But all these type of points are just here as kind of like hooks and points of reference to think and to keep rethinking and rediscussing how we should deal with this storm of virtual realities that is coming to us nowadays.
Thank you very much, Boris. Professor José Gomes Pinto.
Hello, Boris. Thank you for this amazing presentation. Are you listening to me?
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
It was very beautiful and make me my head spinning. My brains, my head is still on my shoulders. But I was thinking about the use of mediated environments. So we use the term of mediated. This is not the question; it's more a provocation for you and I to think if there is such a thing as a non-mediated environment. So if we start from the notion of representation, there is such a possibility of use, as if it's not like a metaphor of talking about a mediated environment. Is there any unmediated environment? Since media is of course, it is you quote McLuhan using the extension of man, or Ernst Kapp just before when he talks about techniques. But do you think that it is now nowadays makes sense to talk about mediated environment as contraposed for an unmediated environment, which we never talk about?
Okay, good, interesting question. Thank you.
For instance, as your example, when you were presenting, the movie was spinning around us. So you are in framing your own presentation to the video, just alongside the video. So the video was part of my interpretation about what I'm hearing.
Of course, yes. Ooh, can you hear me?
Yeah. It's.
Yeah.
I left the micro open.
Oh, okay. Well, if we would see it on the level of organisms, which is always kind of, I mean, life is always an interaction with an environment, then maybe the answer is no. There is no unmediated environment. But I don't know if you want to take it that far.
I agree with you. So I think that in a sense, to talk about unmediated environments, it needs, or at least we should introduce. It's not a critique. It's not. It's only a comment that we should introduce the what Derrida will call a deconstruction, trying to get rid of whatever it mediates our relation to the world, or go to an Arendt sense that the unique thing that could be imagined as unmediated relation to the world is Sprache, is language, in a sense that it only mediates individual between them. So it will fall more on politics than on the notion of.
Yes,
And Peters talks about air, wind, or clouds as media.
Yeah.
yes, he does. No, I must say also to be honest, the term mediated environments is causing me often serious headaches, but I stick with it because it is not an easy one to deal with. I mean, I don't opt for the path of the least resistance in that sense. But it is, it's a good remark, of course, that indeed the deconstruction.
I think that sometimes we forgot. We are so inside the mainstream. I mean, the mainstream discourses that we forgot that in the 19th century, for instance, Freud or Fraser or some anthropologists or the post-structuralists in France, they are trying to go to the primitive people and trying to realize what is a direct experience of the environment. But they're literary persons. So what they are trying to do, it was a naive enterprise, because in a sense they were mediated by all the history we have about understanding the world as such.
Absolutely. I mean, talking about speech or Sprache, as you referred to, indeed, we get into a political terrain then. But there is a very nice link also to be made if you look at the old traditions of the Australian Aboriginals with their songlines and the singing of the land. So basically, while they're singing, the map and the land unfolds, or the environment unfolds. Which is, of course, would lead us to a whole different discourse. But there is, of course, it's also about representation and performativity there very much. I like that that type of examples also a lot. If we talk about an environment that you mediate, that you almost like bring about, let's say.
Thank you, Boris.
Thank you for your attention. I will turn off my video camera now.
Yeah, it was a very inspiring presentation with the video and the ideas. Thank you for that.
I'm happy it resonated on, and I'm very sad I'm not amongst you sharing the space, the real space, whatever that is.
Next time, we hope.
Yes.
See you.
So I'll hang in here and maybe for later some roundtable debates.
Okay, good. See you in a couple of minutes.